and free from the hive mind, this is Rex Bear hosting Leak Project. The Leak Project was created to offer awareness and information not found in the mainstream news. With over 90% of the world's media controlled by only 6 enormous conglomerates, many people today are looking for more accurate information. The Leak Project offers a refreshing approach to the brain drain media. Check back daily for new content as we thrive to bring you the cutting edge in news, current events, on-scene video footage, interviews, and most importantly, the truth. Tonight's guest is Andrieh Vitimus, a spiritual coach with over 15 years' experience helping people to create better realities for themselves. Through divination, mediumship, and solid coaching, Mr. Vitimus is also a sorcerer and healer with the highest initiatory rank in Haitian voodoo. Practicing hypnotherapist and neurolinguistic programming master, hands-on chaos magic, reality manipulation through the Ovaki current is an instant classic and must-have for any inspiring magician or truth seeker out there today. His book is available on Amazon, and check out Andrieh's work also at www.andriehvitimus.com. Andrieh, it's great to have you on here with us at the Leak Project. How are you tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. It's great to have you on the show here tonight. I know that we have spoken via email several times before. You've been pretty booked up here the past several weeks.
Yeah, that does happen.
Fantastic, and that's good to hear. It's given me an opportunity to read through your book. Ton of information there. I mean, over 500 pages, and I've been going through your work, and I'm just absolutely amazed by the amount of information and practical knowledge that people can actually use in everyday situations. I was hoping that you could actually explain to our listeners here at the Leak Project a little bit about what got you into the occult, the unknown, and just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. I started off, I really didn't want to get into the occult. I had no interest in getting into the occult. People in my family were kind of interested in that. My brother especially, I just had no interest. I was actually studying to be a biochemist. I was going to school for psychology and biochemistry. And I had one of those times that we classically would call a shamanic initiation. At the time, I didn't know what that was. And it's really damn scary when you don't know what it is, because things start shifting around. And it was one point where I'm sitting there thinking, I'm a pretty smart guy, and the psychology stuff's not working. I'm doing the best planning. I'm talking to people, mentoring, all the things you would do in business or in engineering, and get a mentor to try to figure out what's not going. Things just not working. And I didn't tell people, what was going on in my head, that, I was down in southern Illinois going to school, and I'm seeing shadows move and all kinds of weird stuff. And I didn't know until later that other people saw those shadows too. And in fact, that freaked them out so much that they avoided me. Had nothing to do with me. I thought it was just, my personality. But it wasn't. And I got really kind of beat up. And I kind of came back, tried to get my first master's degree, came back from Southern Illinois, and ended up kind of homeless for a little while, because things were really falling apart. And I eventually met this person who I'd worked with before in the IT field, who was from New Orleans. And she was a Mormon, but her mother wasn't a Mormon. And her mother knew lots of stuff about hoodoo. She was a black woman. I call her my sister. And she was like, "Oh, no, 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 no. Those, you got to wash your hands and say prayers. When you wash your hands, just say prayers and see the divine light coming over you." And a lot of it started to work. The shadows kind of gave me more room. I got back in school for a master's degree, and then I had to ask hard questions, like any scientist should. Of okay, so this stuff did work. Now what? What is the game of reality that's being played here? Since it clearly is not just a material reality. What do you, and approach it with a scientific method. And it just so happens that although the, the word throws people off of chaos, it so happens that built into the whole philosophy, and it's not really one magical system, but the philosophy is this embracing of the scientific method along with magic. It was something I was already doing because I was already in the hard sciences and started really measuring what you can do, what is possible, and what's realistic. And the more I did, the better off my life got. So I kept doing it. Not
And
the easiest way to learn, but you do learn.
were you of a specific religious background or spiritual system before you got into studying different, different subjects in magic?
You know, I would say I was pretty agnostic, very close to atheism, but not quite. I'd say it was much closer to agnostic. I was on the fence. I didn't really think there could be proof of such things. I didn't think there was any real evidence of such things. And before that, I mean, way when I was a young kid, I was, of course, raised Eastern Orthodox Catholic. So that was very, very interesting transition. But really, no. It really was kind of agnostic and had the profile of that, future scientist of America type of profile.
Sure. So, also, you deal with chaos magic. You put this book together, Hands on Chaos Magic, and for those that are listening, you can pick up his book at Amazon.com. It's got a lot of information that is very modern and refreshing, and it correlates and syncs with works that have been put together hundreds of years ago. And what I like about it is you get into so many different topics, but let's start off with chaos magic in theory and practice. Chaos magic. What is your definition if you were to encapsulate within one sentence what chaos magic actually is? How would you describe it?
It's the idea, and it is an idea because it's not a system of itself, that there may be no truth. And if there's no truth, what could you do? If you were not limited by dogma, what could you do? What could you discover? And that's the core idea of it, is that belief in the different systems is what makes it work the most powerfully. So that's
So,
a radical idea versus what you might hear from a lot of ceremonial magicians, which say the system exists in itself. Chaos magic would say it's the belief that lets you empower the system. Your belief.
so your belief is the actual moving force behind your reality. Therefore, you can create whatever you want to via mind.
That's a good way to put it. It's not totally uh, conflicting with hermetics. Now, I've kind of softened that a little as I get older and say, well, it either lets you empower it or connect to, just in case I'm wrong. Because who
So,
knows? Maybe I might be wrong because ultimately, there may not be an ultimate truth. So I could be wrong. We could be using our mind to connect to things. in reality, and in practice, what that means is that things are a lot more flexible than the way they seem on paper.
Okay, so let's get into that for a second. Then, if there is no truth, there is no solid data point, and everything is flexible and able to manipulate, do you think that we came from something, or we always have been? Where would you predate our existence?
See, that's the wrong question, right? Those are questions we cannot prove. But, and we can conjecture about it, and we could write it down in a book. We might call that book the Bible, the Quran, or any other religions on planet Earth. But we probably won't answer any questions about the soul, and we probably will only answer questions about our physical form, which I believe in evolution. I know many people might, it's a controversial subject, and apparently in the United States now, but in reality, those other questions are meaningful in that they give context to your life. But what that context is, you can of course change. So the idea that that is set in stone might not be. The universe could be paradoxical and have multiple correct answers to that question. And does that help you better navigate the game of life? By asking the question. Now, as a chaos magician interested in practical magic of all sorts, I'd say probably not, because it adds a lot of mental conjecture, but it doesn't actually deal with your ability to produce results or ability to change the reality around you. Unless you can make an argument that it does, and then use that in some way, which you might be able to.
So, with specific ritualistic type magic, certain dogmatic practices, if you look at it scientifically, one might say, well, they perform a certain, movement at a specific time, and they do it in multiple sequences, therefore it's almost hypnotic, and it activates certain parts of the mind. So that's what makes it real, combined with you believing it and the faith, etc. And it sounds to me like the chaos magic is more of a anything goes. It's all available within the imagination, which equals reality.
Yeah, and it is often, that's one of the critiques that people will say about chaos magic, actually, that, oh, this is just anything goes. Well, yes and no. And the reason it's a no is, when you think about it, it is, in fact, unlike many of the dogmatic systems, first of all, chaos magic is not a system. It's like a meta system that sits on top of it. So it'd be like thinking about the different systems. Any different system, you might use it to try to learn from it. The thing is that it is a very hard metric to use what actually works. It's much easier to believe something works and to just assume on faith. If you have to actually sit back, do and learn a system of magic and understand the metaphors within that system of magic, and then use that system and track your results, that's a much harder metric. So while you're free to do anything, you have a lot harder metric you're using to judge it.
With chaos magic, some people that are uneducated or ignorant towards the subject might look at it as something dark or sinister, and then a lot of people just say, oh, chaos, I think of oblivion. There's been so many gods talked about throughout the millennias, the elder gods that the Nordics worship. Now the Abrahamic religion, worships Jesus Christ and Yahweh, and then also the new, I guess you could say, rebel movement. Satanists or Luciferians worship a what they consider a darker god that is more of a light bringer. Is there a specific entity of high power, like a supreme being or deity, and different spectrums within chaos magic, or your beliefs?
Well, obviously, as a chaos magician, as a voodoo assant, an initiated voodoo assant, I'm pretty heavy into voodoo. So from that perspective, I certainly have work with the Loa and the ancestors and stuff, and that's been very rewarding to me. But from a chaos magic point of view, these different systems are equally valid. Each system you could use and work with, because what you're looking for is to see whether or not it improves, whether or not you can improve your magic efficiency and your spiritual knowledge through working with the system. So there's not really a one God. However, when we look to the east, we do see some concepts that do not involve necessarily such a dualistic concept of gods, such as the void in Buddhism, or the Tao in Taoism, and even when you look at the word chaos, it derives from this primordial substance of the universe in Greek mythology that was before even the Titans that the universe gets spawned in. And that's probably many chaos magicians will probably work to trying to get towards this primordial type of force. And that's a good way to think of it because you can apply any metaphor on top of it and get results in your personal practice. But you're still working with something that's there. It's just not formed. And that's very common Eastern thing. I think chaos magic shares a lot of cues from some of the Eastern religions
Okay.
in
Now,
practice, actually.
okay, so as far as chaos magic, are there different, let's get into sigils if we can for a moment.
Sure.
And, I'm fascinated with sigils. I have been studying the process and techniques now off and on for about 10 years now. And I know, I would say maybe about 3 years ago, I put together about 10 of them, and then I tried to forget what the meanings were, to see if I could help manifest that into reality, because I know that's a part of the theory and practice. But give our listeners your information and how exactly sigils work, what they are, and how to be very successful in the art of building them.
Well, sigils are a way to encapsulate a desire. And you kind of gave some good introduction on what sigils are. Is you're trying to encapsulate a desire into an alternate form. Usually, that is a visual representation like a glyph, or it could be an audio representation like a mantra. But it doesn't have to just be that. It could be, you could have a sigil of oils, of essential oils mixed together. You could have a sigil of gestures, which would be if someone was really into dance. You can have a sigil of any senses, really. And what you're trying to do is encapsulate the desire into that set of sensory gestures that have nothing to do with the original desire. But as you go through the process of making this visual or mantra or combination of different things, your subconscious mind remembers that this desire or this purpose, intention, links to this combination of things. The idea of sigil magic comes back from Spare, although he would do it slightly differently than we do in a modern way, in that you would force yourself to then go so deep into a trance state of some sort, whether that's running around the block as mad as you can, excitorially. That's called excitoronosis or inhibition gnosis, where you sit and meditate. But the point is, you're getting your conscious mind to shut down. Your subconscious mind understands when you do these gestures repetitively or another way, that's the original desire, and the whole point is to shut down the conscious mind and the near conscious mind, because what the conscious mind does, it has all these assumptions about how the universe works that then make it so that your intention can't be put out there to the universe so you can receive it. So it's a way of getting past the problem that the conscious mind is in our social reality construct that doesn't really let you believe magic is real per se. So you do these things to kind of force the conscious mind out of the way, get it out of the way, get all your doubts out of the way, and then miracles can happen.
If somebody wanted to draw a sigil, how would you explain to them the best way to do it and make it effective?
Well, the easy way to do it is to just write down the intention. Now, we have to talk a little bit about intention and what a good intention is versus a bad intention. And a lot of times, this trips people up because what they're asking for and what they're telling their subconscious mind to go get them doesn't make sense. You know, the words become important. So if you say something like, I want to have money come to me, that's a really bad intention. And we learn that in hypnosis too. Why? Because you don't want the money to come to you. You do want the money to come to you, but if you tell your subconscious mind you want the money to come to you, that the subconscious mind interprets that in some way like you want the want of money, which is not what you want. What?
It'd be the opposite of actually getting it.
Right. You would get poorer because you get the want. So you want to phrase it in a direct positive way, like this amount of money will come to me by this time. Now, that's a much better intention. In the book, I give multiple examples of when you're starting out, like you will see a bluebird within 2 days, or you'll win this percentage amount in poker when you play it. Those are all good, solid intentions. Now, for you to say, this amount of money will come to me by this time, of course, that depends on what your sphere of availability is, what is going on in your life. So it's not like this is where people get confused and where people get frustrated because the books never make it clear. Well, Hands on Chaos Magic does really point this out. It's not like Charmed. You can't just wave a wand and you get it to happen. It has to be a movement of probability. So it has to be something in the realm that is near you or that you can conceive of or that it could happen. So enchanting for money, which since we're on the topic, is lots of people would like to have more money. But if you work at a job where you don't have any ability to get raises, or you don't have bonuses, or you don't have a kind of sales situation where the money can come in because you have a good week, well, then how's this going to come to you? It could still happen, but as the difficulty gets higher, it gets less likely. So choosing that intention is kind of really an art. And it takes practice. But then once you have the intention, you can take the letters and remove all the duplicate letters so you have one letter of each type. It doesn't matter if you have multiples of the letters. It's just a starting block for some artistic rearrangement. And so you take those letters. I usually at that point, once I have the first letter and removed all the duplicate letters, I usually rewrite it in a random way to get further away from the intention. And then from there, you can take those letters and arrange them, draw them next to each other or draw them on top of them, turn them upside down. The sky's the limit. All you're trying to do is make it look artistic and make all the letters be there. That's the first step. And when you're pretty satisfied with that, then ask yourself a simple question. You have this jumble of letters, it still looks like letters, and say, could you remember all that? And most of the time the answer is no. So then say, well, what's the most important lines that I should keep? And kind of erase lines or redraw it with just the lines that you want to keep. And keep simplifying until you go, could I remember this if I ran around the block 10 times and was out of breath? If the answer is yes, then it's a good sigil. Then go forward. And I usually recommend at this point, if people have some knowledge of divination, to kind of check, maybe say, hey, is this sigil I can work with, or is sigil not? Is there any intended consequences? I'll tend to use tarot, but you can use the I Ching, and if in a pinch, you could just flip a coin to see, is this a good sigil, yes or no? Is this a sigil I should use? Just to make sure that you're on the same page. Once you have that visual sigil, you can do almost anything with it. So you could run around the block 10 times, like I mentioned, to exhaustion, and then the whole point is to get to the point where your conscious mind is absolutely shut down. So that could be dancing at a nightclub until you're almost so tired that everything just kind of blurs. It could be meditating for a while, so you get that perfect mind calmness that comes with certain uh, Zen meditations and others. It could just be any combination of staring at the sigil. It could be, if you have access to it, you could be strung up in a sun ceremony, or, BDSM club. Any of these things are okay. What's important is that you're getting to the point, either through meditative means, through hypnosis, through excitatory means, that your conscious mind is shutting down, and you just hold that sigil in your mind all the way through until you're exhausted, or your mind is completely quiet, and only the sigil remains.
Now,
Now
there's
that takes practice, by the way. That's not just, you just don't do that and uh, get get the focus to do that with no training. So I don't want anyone to think you could just bust out a sigil like what I described and not practice focus first.
right. Well, and it's also interesting, Andrea, when you look at these big corporations and businesses and conglomerates out there. One that comes into mind is Starbucks, and they all have one thing in common, and it's a symbol or a sigil that is put in place that has certain when somebody sees it, it has a specific reaction consciously and subconsciously. And I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I would like to get your thoughts on this. Do you think that big businesses and corporations use specific talismans and sigils and their corporate logos to make more money and get more business?
Now that's a very interesting question. And back in the day, I wrote an article titled "The Modern Vampire God Forms of Corporations." Very, very interesting question. Now, they don't think they do this. Some don't. I seriously doubt that. I think some seriously know what they're doing. Um, and even if they don't consciously know what they're doing, when you get so many people together for a single purpose, and corporations usually have a single purpose along with strategic goals. I'm getting a master's in business administration, so I really kind of studying this stuff all the time. But when you get so many people together in such an umbrella where their minds are syncing around such goals and such ideas, with consequences that really kind of interweave with their life so much, it's inevitable that a egregore, or which is a type of artificial spirit, will evolve around them. And so, in practice, what happens is exactly what you described. They act as a magical talisman, even though people aren't doing magic per se in the way we would consider it. The subconscious mind is, and it's feeding up the chain in the corporate structure to make that company go better.
Well, and you brought up artificial spirits. What was the name that you called them?
Well, in this case, egregore.
Could you describe them in detail for us, please?
So this is one thing that is talked about in older schools of magic, and especially the West, not the West, in the East, with in Buddhism with tulpas, but in the West you have stories of things like the golem and elementals, which can go either way. But the idea is, and it's a radical idea if everyone is used to the fact that, well, the spirits are there and that's the end of it. Except when you study various systems, you can create spirits. Now, if you're in purely a spirit mindset, a spirit model of the universe, when enough people get together and have certain interactions and they do things, and that interactions, we might call them patterns in psychology, but from the astral sense of things, from the greater spiritual construct, those patterns and intelligence collectively form an artificial spirit, which I call the egregore. Many things have egregores. That's why they're tough to change. And they seem to act, if you would step away from them, as an intelligent, self-directed entity. But the entity itself wasn't like a Platonic entity. It wasn't something that was existing before mankind. It came from the collective of mankind. And so many spirits, even city god forms, even ancient spirits, you have to ask, is this the collective god form of a city that they created and it's grown past their ability? That because no one is currently working with them, those civilizations fell and the egregore remains, or is it something else? And those are interesting questions. In the modern times, we certainly see corporations have immense impact on our life, and they act in a way that seems autonomous to the people who are in them. As in, you might have a CEO who's directing things, but the whole corporation has a vibe, a culture. It presents itself as a unified thing, and because of that perception and that unified thing, we can step away and look at it from a spiritual side of thing and say it is a unified thing, and call that thing an artificial spirit because it acts as if it has artificial intelligence. It acts to protect itself. It acts in a way to maximize what its purpose is. These are all things you would expect spirits to do or people to do. So corporations do the same thing. And when you try to go into the astral space and look at or otherwise deal with some of these large corporate entities from a purely shamanic point of view, they certainly have that. They act in a way that even to magically defend themselves because the collective is self-aware. And in fact, in my own experimentation, you can pretty much build these artificially through various techniques. I cover some in hands-on chaos magic, and you can build them behind an organization. You can start with an egregore and then build a business around it. There's all kinds of different combinations. Now, I think for the most part, but not all parts, it usually goes the opposite way. Any collective of human activity on the spiritual side of things can create an egregore which influences the behavior and acts to protect itself. Now, there's probably some corporations where people actually set out and designed it from scratch, and it's kind of scary actually. Think about magicians doing that, but also very cool.
Well, and also many of the buildings today, even the Pentagon, first thing that comes to mind is they're built to specific geometrical shapes and patterns and specific areas of the world, like the ley lines and everything are aligned certain places and points and patterns. So one might think that people at the higher levels, many of the builders of America and also people that have a lot of assets around the world know how to utilize these patterns and, certain agendas. So now I'm kind of getting off of what we were talking about, but in your opinion, have you seen that? I mean, have you seen certain things that make you say, "Yep, they're using chaos magic, or they're using certain type of magic per se to get what they want to take place." And when I'm referring to they, I'm talking about people in Hollywood or politics or some of the elitists per se.
Well, I'm not the only one who will say something like much of our society is based upon what used to be called black magic. And I watch some of the other shows, and it's not the first time someone's mentioned stuff like this. But when you think about it, what is black magic? Is this ability to change people's minds and get them stuck on something that is counterproductive to their own lives. We see that all the time. Get the emotions riled up, get them continuous going. We didn't. That's what magic. Lots of magical text even deal with this from before, but now we call it psychology. So it's not like it ever went away. And even the founding fathers, many of them were alchemists. So we have to really consider that these things never went away. We just call them different things. We don't put them under the guise of religion anymore. And you can certainly see people using very underhanded psychological manipulations from corporations and politics that really people are not acting in their best interest. Now, is that a form of magic? Certainly, from my point of view, it is. Now, other people might argue the point. But in the modern sense of things, these are our modern demons. These are our modern god forms that are arising out of our culture now. And I can say that because I'm taking a step back. I don't have absolute truth. I don't have the dogma per se. But even when you study cultures previously, those god forms arose from the cultures. So is these massive corporations that are not acting in people's best interest, that are causing people to act not in their own best interest, is that a form of magic? I answer absolutely yes, because they have more power than the individual. Is this any different than Zeus striking down lightning down? Some of these corporations are ruining our environment, and they don't seem touchable to the individual. It takes another collective of people to get in the same mindset and create a counter egregore, in a way, to fight it. Now, some of the underhanded kind of linkages, although, like I said, we call it psychology, the more you know about advertising and marketing, the more you realize this is really having a negative effect on everyone's psyche. And I consider that magic. And I consider it magic with somebody who has a degree in psychology. Because we don't have to go too far back in our history to see that most of the ancient cultures considered most of these psychological techniques as magic.
Well, and it's interesting also. I read a book by Aleister Crowley in his magnum opus 4, and he describes magic as being any thought or movement or action that has an effect on something or someone else. So, and it's safe to say magic could really be anything as long as it has an effect on the reality or your surroundings. But so you get into Sigils and the ability to bypass the conscious mind and go directly to the subconscious. It's it's a very remarkable art indeed. Now there's also elementals, and a lot of people aren't well versed on what that actually is. I was wondering if you could describe those in detail for our listeners.
This is one topic that is actually somewhat complicated because people have different definitions. First type of elemental, and some of which that I train people is that you can create a thought form or another type of smaller artificial spirit out of the element itself. Some of those, and by elements I mean the classical Greek elements, which is fire, water, earth, air. But it's perfectly possible to create elemental type things out of emotions, out of like on my blog I made a happiness elemental that would go out and cause happiness. So you can create these. But
How did you do that, real quick, please?
real quick, the easiest way is you basically use self hypnosis. Put yourself in an absolutely happy state. Imagine yourself at that state, what it feels like if your body was just zinging with the happiness, and then you kind of just imagine it kind of out in front of you with all your five senses. You kind of just shape it, keep going, working with that happiness, giving it a personality and a form that you can then use and kind of send out to go do things, which is Servitor Creation 101, Thought Form Creation 101. Encapsulated a whole bunch right there. But that's basically it. If you can fully embrace that emotion and then project it out and imagine you work with clay, you can do a lot.
Wow. So you're visualizing this form, and you're projecting energy into it. That's pretty cool.
Now, there was a lot we didn't say, wasn't there? Right?
Sure.
Because that is basically it. But that means it's not just visualizing. You're feeling it. You might even smell it. You might be using all your senses. But that means you have to be able to do that and have the focus to do all that, which is coming back to something I said. So, yes, it is profoundly easy, but Zen meditation is profoundly easy as well. I mean, you sit there and breathe. That's all you do. That should be easy. But it turns out it's not so easy because of the focus. And then we have to kind of realize that we don't live in a culture that supports focus. So there's a lot that goes into that, of retraining your mind so that way you can do it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's almost impossible to not think about anything for more than 5 seconds at a time. I've been trying to do it for years. Talk about ADD and a society of that as such. Now, how would you? I mean, how do you, Andrieh, just completely clear the mind and silence the mind and think of nothing? Because I know that's the key. That's the foundation stone of being able to do all sorts of things, isn't it?
It is. And this is something that honestly takes a lot of practice. It's something that nobody wants to do because it's the boring stuff. Right? Who wants to sit around staring at walls? That they want to, call up things, get things to come, do the great work of magic. But it's some of the most important thing is to do this just getting yourself to calm down, sitting down, taking stock of your own emotions, taking stock of your own patterns, and just sitting and breathing and paying attention to your breath. That's usually like the first step. Just sit and pay attention to what happens to your body when you just sit and breathe and try to extend your breath and try to minimize your breath and see what happens when you change how you breathe and just pay attention to your breathing. And amazingly enough, you learn a lot just from that. You learn tons about how your body reacts to different breaths, what happens when you slow your breath down. And that's all you're doing is just focusing on that. Then there's other exercises. There's tons and tons and tons of exercises I give in hands-on chaos magic for this, like staring at a point on a wall, which is much more difficult than people think, and just trying to stare as long as you can without blinking. So again, you're teaching your mind to focus and your body to focus without getting distracted. And you're right about the 5 second 5 seconds is about what the average adult can hold any one thing in mind. So you have to work up from 5 seconds. Part of this is being really self-compassionate and understanding it's a process, not instantaneous. Which means if you practice for like 2 weeks and get from 5 seconds to 30 seconds, that's a major accomplishment. Now, people have to realize their expectations is, maybe it's a little like Leviosa from Harry Potter, you know, just wave the wand. But going from 5 seconds to 30 seconds, for most people, in their level and ability to focus just by staring at the wall, is the difference probably in about 10% productivity at work. Now, if you thought about that, 10% productivity at work is a huge amount. And that could mean the difference between being fired, raises, all kinds of stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Because it's that little bit, that 25 seconds means you have that much more focus in all areas of your life. So once we get into this, wait, is psychology separate from the rest of your life? Is the magic separate from the rest of your life? No, it's not. So the focus helps all areas across the board in your life. And these simple techniques, although they sound really simple, and they are really simple, it's doing them. It's the practice that you get really better at that, to the point you can hold the sigil in mind till you're running around the block.
And there's different types of breathing that you talk about, and one of those is called Fibonacci breathing.
Yeah, I love that one.
How does that work?
You can tell that I'm a bit of a math geek when I start talking about Fibonacci numbers.
Yeah, that's awesome.
A little bit of the hard scientist in me came out. Fibonacci is a pattern of numbers that deal with the golden mean, and it appears everywhere in nature. If you ever watched the movie Pi, it's true. You could see the spiral of cones, the galaxy spirals, how neurons interconnect. Even what is considered perfect beauty in a face all deal with these Fibonacci numbers in different averages and ratios. So the Fibonacci numbers is a sequence of where you're taking on breath patterns in seconds to match the Fibonacci numbers depending on how deep your lung capacity is. So it's using mathematics. There's other mathematics you can apply with breath work to do other interesting things. And what's the point of this? It's just an interesting game to teach you that you can have different breath patterns. Although that particular breath patterns, it does pretty insightful things when you do it. It doesn't quite feel like Barden's breath patterns or the other breath patterns. And it does open up, it's hard to describe, interesting mental avenues. So
sure. And you also get into a lot of different exercises in your book. You talk about different ways to improve the senses, your sight, the sense of smell. You get into etheric bodies and how to feed them. But if you could, talk to us about some different exercises that you do and that you recommend to your audience about how to actually increase the ability to foresee the future or tap into the Akashic records, the sixth sense.
Well, future telling is another very difficult skill. The way I usually do it to tap into things is to clear my mind. Now, I don't view the future as set. So I have to say that assumption right off the bat. So when I do divinations or try to tap into the future, it's what is the most probable, the way I would phrase it and the way I would look at it is, if I did nothing to change this outcome, what is the most probable future coming down the path? Right? So Akashic records, well of weird, all these things kind of put paradigmal symbols and metaphors into the equation. that we have to then kind of understand what those symbols are. So with the Akashic records too, it's what the first step is the focus. Okay, can you focus? Then the second step is letting go. And by letting go, it's letting go of thoughts. This is harder than it seems too, because you can confuse yourself. And it's not just confusing yourself. You can use it becomes wishful thinking. So you say, "Oh, I'm in the Akashic records, and oh look, I'm the Quidditch champion," or going back to our Potter reference, uh, like the mirror in the movie. And that's the wishful thinking. You have to get past all that. So when you're first meditating and trying to go to the Akashic records, you're really going to get a lot of wishful thinking. You have to let the images go until you get much deeper, until the point that your conscious mind is shut down, or mostly shut down, just like sigils. So that way you can then, the information that you get, and usually at this point, the information you get is going to be hard to hold on to. So you have to really practice first letting things go, and then you get to this place through the use of metaphor, through the use of ritual, and then you have to hold on to as much as you can, and that takes a little practice. And the more times you do that, the easier it is to hold on to the information. Now, to me, that is the first part, but not the most important part. The most important part to me is when you're trying to look at the future, is to then write down what you got and verify it. Because it doesn't matter if you have an experience, if it's not verified that that is in fact what occurs, you have to go back and retool the metaphors and work you're doing. And that retooling process is where you get better and better and better at divination and telling the future and touching Akashic records. Now, most people use the Akashic records, from my understanding, basically to learn about themselves. So they're learning about their own essence and soul from the point of view of paradigms that accept the Akashic records. And that's useful self-knowledge. Now, to tell the future, again, the most powerful way is to do this incremental re-engineering, going back, fine-tuning your techniques, seeing what gets better and better results, going back, doing it over and over and over and over again until you get a reasonable level of skill. And that is something that you can't just teach by books. You have to practice it. So it brings into an interesting, large philosophical difference, is the difference between a priori knowledge and a posteriori knowledge. I might mispronounce that. It's late here in Cleveland. But that's the difference between some knowledge given to you and your experiential knowledge. To really get better and better and better at divination, it has to be experiential knowledge, and then you're fine-tuning it each time based on the verification you get. Now, eventually, after a year or two of doing these kind of exercises, we're using some sort of metaphor or ritual to access that other state and access that other place or whatever it is, and verifying each time, you find out that your divination is getting better and better and better. You're able to pull that information down. But that's not a quick fix, as you heard me describe.
Right. And also, before I read your book, Hands-On Chaos Magic, Reality Manipulation Through the Ovaki Current, I read a book by Franz Barden that talks about ways to improve your, different senses, the perceptions of being able to possibly tap into the Akashic records, etc. And what I liked about it was just the practical information that you can put into everyday reality. And you've done the same thing, but it's like even more advanced and even more current. So I appreciate the correlations, and And I think when we talked earlier, you told me you hadn't even read his work before you put this book together, so that makes it even more incredible.
Not the first, no, yeah, not the first copy. I had not read it. I wish I had. It was when I did read it, I was like, yes, this is what I'm talking about, right here.
Right. So, but the reason I brought that up is because when I practice some of those exercises, for weeks at a time, he would talk about how if you want to improve your visual abilities to see possibly into the future or whatever, you need to visualize something that isn't there, and once you can actually see it for first it was a second, then 5 seconds, then a minute, etc. Once you can see it for a period of time, then you've mastered that ability, and you can go to the next century, the next level, whether it's smelling something or feeling something, etc. So it reminds me a lot of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, and I know you're a practitioner of NLP. It sounds like you've been able to incorporate the education and current stuff as well as some of the old and put it together to where it all harmonizes.
Well, that's a beautiful thing about where we're at. There's tons of information, and if you don't lock yourself in the dogma, some of the techniques that are coming out from science, and in NLP, they are modeling, they're not just, Bandler didn't just model psychologists and hypnotherapists. He was also clearly, there's some indication that he was modeling and trying to simplify some would be classical occult techniques too. Um, the more you get into it, the more you realize he didn't want to call it that. He didn't want to get into the esoterics or try to make it seem like it was occulty, because that's honestly not what probably would sell. But NLP is a wonderful tool that simplifies cognitive science in a lot of cases. And cognitive science is a wonderful tool. If you can start integrating these modern disciplines that come from our own culture, we can start to better the techniques from even older times and the rituals from older times, because simply put, we understand more about the brain. And if we understand more about the brain, and the mind is what has to connect you to these things, and we can argue about whether they exist outside the mind all night, and we wouldn't get anywhere. But we at least can agree that it is the mind that connects you. And if the more you understand about that tool that you are using to connect and manipulate the reality around you, the more powerful your magic is. So of course we should incorporate this research. And of course we should incorporate all of these things that we understand about the brain now into how we work with our applied spirituality. Now, this is not a concept that everyone will agree with. But if you think about it, it makes the most sense. Even if your listeners were very Christian, I bet you if you spent with me, book a few sessions, within a couple weeks, you can be trained how to pray in a way that really lights up your brain and really works with your mind. So it's like a tuning fork when you're trying to connect to Jesus or God. All these things, it doesn't matter what the religion is, we know so much about it to make that resonance there happen so much more powerfully. And why aren't we using them? Because there's this disconnect between science and what is thought about religion that doesn't need to be there.
It's interesting you say that also, because many of the works that I've read on magic, the occult, the unknown, says if you're raised a specific religion, it's not necessarily a good idea to change your religion, halfway through your life or whatever, although many people do, because that kind of messes with your I guess you could say astral self, the self that you don't see with your physical eyes in this specific light spectrum. So, it's interesting that you bring that up, and it makes me wonder, and I'd really like to get your opinion on this, because you're so well versed in many magical practices, as well as you're very good with math and science. The Hollywood media right now, It just seems to be really pushing this dark agenda. And I've read books on psychology that talk about how if you see somebody do something, the part of your mind activates the same as the person that's actually committing that action. Whether you see it on TV or see somebody do it on the streets, if you watch somebody rob somebody on television or in real life, the part of your brain activates the same part of theirs that they're doing that, that act. So you've got Hollywood now that has so much control, and the special effects are just amazing. It seems to me like they're doing these mass rituals on, the entire populace, millions and billions of people that are watching these movies, and it's causing their minds to act certain ways and respond in certain ways. And then you talk about these artificial spirits that are created. Do you think that the people, those behind the scenes, or the very elite that control Hollywood, do you think they have like this agenda to feed certain entities?
Well, I don't get into conspiracy theory much, but you can certainly you could certainly make that case, and it wouldn't be irrational. I don't like dwelling on the conspiracy theories because it gets a little depressing. But even if they weren't, the end, even if it was a headless wonder, the net impact is the same. And you're absolutely right about what you described. Our mind ultimately cannot tell the difference between fiction and reality. It's only the conscious mind that separates it. The subconscious mind really doesn't understand it. That's why reading books and fiction is so pleasurable, because it activates that. And then what we're really activating there is a sense of mirror neurons that then if you see something happen to someone else, it's also happening to you, which is also something that Buddhism talks about. That there's no real separation between any of us, as an interesting aside. So what are they serving? We don't have to associate it with conspiracy theories. The truth is that people who are scared or fearful and depressed buy more stuff. And whether you label that as a dark god, whether you label that as dark spirits or whatever it is, or whether you just say it's unfeathered capitalism, doesn't matter. The end product's the same. People who are fearful, depressed, are more easily controlled. They do not think as clearly, and this is not me just saying this. Every research study will say that. They are less able to take volition of their lives, and they're less likely to complain or rebel. So you have greater levels of control. You need less resources to control people, and people are more miserable. So they tend to spend their time, money, and effort on things that are not in line with their dreams or their goals, which you can then capitalize on.
Okay. And
well, yeah, I mean, it sounds horrible, but it really is that kind of equation.
Well, and also you look at fear as a driving factor, and fear sells, and obviously the capitalist market that we are surrounded by, if you come out with something on TV that causes somebody to be scared or fearful of something, then they're more likely to respond in a certain way. So it can definitely be used for marketing practices and psychology, etc. So whatever label you want to put on it, you can, and that's fine, and that totally makes sense. And I appreciate your information on that. Now, shamanism, you discussed that with us a little bit earlier in the interview. I'm fascinated with shamans and their ability to tap into what some might call the underworld or the astral realms. Have you ever been able to tap into the other side, or a different breaking through the veil and actually make contact with different entities that was literally just as normal as having a conversation with me right now?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, what's that like? I mean, describe that to us.
Well, it depends on the entity. The first time, I guarantee you, for most people, it'll be scary as hell because it's not going to be like a linear conversation. That's the first thing. It's not going to be like me talking to you, even if you're fully immersed, um, because time doesn't work the same way. You take that for granted, that time works the same way, but it doesn't. Once you're in the spirit world, there's no sense of time. So 5 minutes could be 2 hours here, or the opposite. Could be have meditated for 5 minutes and it feels like you're there for 2 hours, just talking with something because there's no time. It's relative, and then you could also have multiple just conversations going at the same time. Like, we communicate and don't use much of our brain when we communicate. Vocal communications and full body language does communicate really well with between humans. But from the spiritual world, there's many more aspects to your mind than just those limited communication means. So you could be having a communication with someone, and at the same time, there's a massive amount of information streaming from others, different areas into your mind. And you come away with that, and you have to process it and think, what just happened here? What just happened here? And you're not the same. And that's true of any real encounter with any real spirit. You will not be the same. You will be different because it will have touched your mind in a deeper way than us just talking. In some way, it will have changed you. And that's the sign that you had a real spiritual contact, is that you come out of the contact, you come out of meditation, you come out of doing whatever you're doing, and you're not the same. That often happens the first time you make contact with the spirit. You either have different thoughts, you either have different desires, you have to really take an accounting of it and understand what just happened here. And it might just be the visual thing, might just be that you're just talking with a spirit on the surface, but you can feel it underneath, like the foundations, the assumptions you had disappear. So there's a lot that happens when you have those kind of experiences. I think they're profoundly awesome. They make the work totally worth it. But then you have to prepare for it. You have to be able to accept change, and you have to accept the changes in yourself, and use discernment to decide whether or not those changes are things that you actually would want in your life or not. And if they're not, then you have to go back and kind of fix yourself then and see what happened.
What was the most frightening experience you have ever had making contact with an entity from the other side?
I've had lots of experiences, but early on still was some of the most frightening, when the shadows were moving. I mean, recently, there was these two spirits that I still have a lot of work to do with. It's not like I did what they asked. I haven't gotten through what they asked for because I don't have a lot of time. And I got sick for 3 days. Like, I stayed in bed for 3 days when I encountered them. Now, when I came out of the sickness, I knew it was, people told me it was 3 days. But when I was in the middle of the vision, it felt like years. That I'd spent years with these spirits, and it was quite frightening because they had set up a whole situation where I couldn't remember who I was. And I agreed to it initially and then didn't remember who I was in the vision. That's quite scary. As a test to see if I was worthy.
What do they want you to do?
Oh, they want me to write a book, a fiction book.
And what do you think their purpose is?
Well, do you think all fiction is just fiction?
That's why I'm asking. It's, you know, a fiction book, and that they want you to write it. That makes me wonder. Well, what's the end goal?
What if you think about, we talk about artificial egregores, we talk about thought forms. What if spirits reach through us through our art, through our symbols, through our fiction? You know?
Like their medium to live?
Yeah, what if artists are a type of medium?
Huh.
Because you realize when you read something, remember we just talked about it, your brain can't separate the two things.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that would make me wonder, with the Abrahamic religions having so much power and clout over politics and society, the King James version of the Holy Bible, let's say, as an example, magic, or being able to think for yourself, or having the ability to use something outside of the normal senses, is looked at as satanic and evil, and the possibility of burning in a lake of fire for all eternity. Do you think that the Bible was actually written to have specific riddles and information kind of encoded within hidden verses or whatever, and then also causing a global fear on the unknown, so it would almost like give them all the power, and then people would stay ignorant to the fact that they have the ability to do a lot more than they currently are, because they're, succumbed or imprisoned within their own thoughts?
Well, first we have to look at the Bible in a complicated or a more nuanced way, right? We can talk about whether or not Jesus existed, and then we can talk about the Paulian influence and whether or not Paul was an actual disciple right from the start, and the effect that the Roman politics had on the development of Christianity. All this comes into play. Religions are political artifacts. They are not just religious, right? They haven't been religious since the dawn of our civilization. They're used for a cultural and political tool. So we have to think about the Bible in that sense. And yes, the Abrahamic religions have an enormous amount of power. Could our society as it currently our society work if people were actualized individuals? No. It couldn't. Because everyone would then go and do what they believed was the most important and value-added things. That doesn't make a capitalist society work. And I know we're talking very political, but we really think about that for a minute. It just cannot work. But if you can belittle and tell people they're going to go to this fiery pit of hell and pain if they use self-empowerment techniques, it makes it a lot easier to keep them and keep their own personal power out of their own hands. And that may not be what Christianity is about, but that's how it's being used right now.
Well, right. I mean, if you read the Nag Hammadi treatise, which has a lot of texts that were written around the time of Jesus, it has completely different interpretations, and many people...
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So, and another thing that is very interesting with religion is it seems as if many people will not look outside of their faith. They won't even research something, and they're willing to put their entire livelihood and what they, their souls even into a thought process. And I don't have anything against anybody's beliefs or religious systems. If they're not hurting me and or my family, hey, good for you. You can believe in a unicorn, you can believe in a Smurf, you can and believe in whatever you want. That's fantastic. So I don't certainly have any negativity towards somebody that believes in something different, but it just seems very, very interesting. And also, have you read much about the archons?
A little bit in Enochian and how the archons work, but not much in the conspiratorial theory, but about how they control and manipulate everything, stuff like that. Only just a little bit about Enochian magic and how they're sort of tied to different zodiac things.
Sure. Now, okay, that's fine. We don't need to discuss that. The tree of life is a very powerful tool to many that study the occult. And when I say the occult, I just referring to the unknown. Could you describe to our listeners what the tree of life is, and do you use that in your everyday life?
I don't use it in my everyday life. I think about it, uh, getting into it, but really what it is a map of reality. That's what it is. So you have lots of maps of reality in different systems. You could say the chakras are a map of reality, of personal reality. The tree of life is a map of reality. Every single system of belief has a map of reality. So you have the different realms in Astru. In voodoo, we have the different spirits that map out reality. The tree of life is a different map of the reality. Now, of course, a map is not actually the territory. That's a phrase from neurolinguistic programming. So it doesn't necessarily mean it is reality, but it's a way to interact with reality from the metaphysical side of things that puts it into an organized construct that you can understand a certain progression. Now, that progression in the tree of life is a progression towards unification with the divine. Because in the mysticism, in Jewish mysticism and ceremonial magic, that is the goal. So the map leads to a certain place. That's the first thing people have to understand. So when you work with the tree of life, you're working with the different sephira, and you're guiding your consciousness and trying to incur experiences that guide your consciousness through a map towards what ceremonial magicians consider being united with God, at least for a period of time, or at least for getting closer and closer. That's a whole lot of books written on the tree of life, but that's really what it is. And then it deals with the different realms, which are different mappings, essentially a further mapping of reality, as the ceremonial magicians and Kabbalists actually put together the universe and the different astral realms. So it's a map, a guidepost, as it were, on how to get up and become one with the divine.
And you also have a shape shifting or shape changing program. I was
Yeah,
wondering if you could get into that and explain how that works.
shapeshifting is I love it. So I do lots of work to go on the astral plane and shapeshift, and you can get a lot of information from the spiritual side of things if you can take on a resonance closer to the spirits you're trying to communicate with. And that means changing yourself continuously, changing what your conscious mind can accept continuously, changing your own patterns so that way you can accept the information faster. And so you can learn how to take on angelic qualities or demonic qualities or nature spirit qualities by studying them, by really interacting with them. And then when you pull yourself out of your body, you can interact with them in a way that's more resonant with them or closer to them in, in kind of the way your mindset is. So the shapeshifting course at first deals with a lot of the necessary ideas of learning about yourself and where you are in society, how society constrains all the things we just talked about, how society actually constrains you as an individual and constrains the expression of the individual. Because it gets really hard if you are a constrained individual, as we all are, including me, to experience something that is profoundly different in nature, that has a completely different resonance and a completely different reality surrounding it. So you have to work on becoming more and more mentally flexible, understanding where you're at, understanding yourself first, really kind of getting out of the autopilot of where most people are and where it's so easy for even magicians to fall back into this autopilot numbing of society that goes on. Once you get past that, then you can kind of be learn the flexibility to adopt the characteristics of these very alien spirits. And alien, by alien I mean, I know it's common that everyone thinks, oh, an angel is just an easy ride, but I guarantee you angels have been some of the scariest uh, encounters I've had, because they're not what people think. And you have to be able to be able to be flexible enough to really pull in the full presence, to really pull in the, the information, to really pull in the experience and accept the experience without throwing away parts of it. And that's what a lot of people do. They'll try to make the experience fit into a certain hole. So instead, by learning kind of these techniques of shape shifting, of mental awareness, of mental flexibility, to really take the mind and stretch it, allows us to more powerfully interact with the spirit world, so that we really, really can take changes onto the world around us.
Now, you say you've made contact with angelic beings before. There,
Sure.
there's a book out there called The 72 Lesser Keys of Solomon.
Well, those are not angelic forces, generally speaking.
Right, they're the total opposite from I guess you could say, Abrahamic standpoint, as far as they're looked at as lower entities, demonic type entities, and you can basically draw their sigils and invoke them with the different tools of magic, I guess. But have you had any contact or influence from some of those different entities that are referred to as the 72 lesser keys?
Sure, sure. They exist all around. I mean, if you work with the system, you can you can communicate with them. And I think this is where we get into a problem of politics again, right? Because of course, from a purely Christian point of view, demons are the worst possible thing. But the word demons comes from the word daemon, which just means spirit in Greek.
Right.
And some of these spirits are so clearly like Canaanite pagan gods that got, you know, are in the same even from the same region of Judaism, that you know exactly what's going on, right? The word daemon becomes demon, and they become the scapegoats,
Right.
even though they were at one time probably pagan or city-state gods. And they represent values oftentimes that are in opposition to Judaic thought or Christian thought, right? Many aspects of Judaic or Christian thought involves shame and limitation on your actions, you know. So you have Canaanite gods that become demons later that were actually gods of wealth and abundance and fertility and pleasure. Like the best things in life. However, if you have a philosophy that does not embrace those things, they become the scapegoats. We can't separate politics from what is and language from what these spirits are. So that said, are all of them nice? No, no. They're not. Some of them you don't want to deal with because you don't know what you're dealing with. Um, but we can't separate that that thing that I was getting at. You can't separate the politics of how history evolves from the spirits themselves and where these spirits originate from. So Poke Runyon, he's another ceremonial magician. In some cases, he was the first one to use certain types of mirror things, right? He makes the correspondence between Ishtar and Astarte and some of the Goetic spirits because they're ancient gods, and he pulls them through that way. And you have to realize what we think is evil is a political choice. And if you don't examine that, you don't know whether or not is it evil, or is it evil because somebody said it was. That's a hard question. That is one that requires a lot of self-analysis and a lot of thought. And to go back to your topic about if we start off with a religion, you should keep it. Doesn't that seem like a prison cell in a way? Doesn't that seem like it just serves exactly what we were just talking about? Somebody gets to describe what's evil and keep you there? Because when you lose the dogma of everything and start analyzing everything, it becomes a lot less clear on what's going on. And the questions look a lot more like, is this useful to me? Is this force useful to me? And that may not be yes to everyone for those type of spirits, and it may be no for some people. And it depends on the individual magician, where they're at, and what kind of vibe and personality they have. So it gets into a lot more details of how do you work? How do you work on the inside? Why are you calling these things up? All these things come into play, especially once we lose the idea that they might necessarily be bad. Now, that's not to say that I'm encouraging everyone to go out and get the lesser Keys of Solomon. I don't encourage that unless you have a couple years of magical work behind your belt. But I can tell you that any interactions that I know people have had with those entities, you know what? It goes a lot better when you're not threatening them right off the bat. That just
Right.
makes sense. If you threaten
Right.
me, I'm going to be like, screw you. I want to screw you over. Right?
Well, and that's
And
what some of
that's,
the invocations start with. It's interesting you bring that up. They're like, "You will bow to me and do as I say," or "I will banish you to the." Wow.
yeah, they do, right? And what would you do if someone told you that?
Right. Right. Absolutely.
I know if somebody told me, you'll do what I say. If someone slipped me a gun and I was a slave, what am I going to do? I'm going to try to break free.
Right. Right.
So you can't have it both ways. You can't think that the existence of spirits is absolute and then treat spirits like that.
Well, and let me jump into ritualistic magic here for a minute because
Sure, sure.
there's certain tools that you need to use, or that is recommended to use, like the dagger, the sword, the robe, the altar, the cup, the circle of protection, and then the banishing rituals, etc. And I know that might not be your specialty, but you definitely deal in.
I've done more than my fair share of it. Let's put it that way.
Great, great. So, I mean, if you could describe those tools to our listeners and why it's important to have those specific items if you're going to perform ritualistic magic? And do
Well,
you
I have
find it even effective? I mean, is it effective to you, or is it now that you're to the point to where you don't need any of that stuff? You can just,
I don't
do it.
need any of that stuff. Not entirely. I'll give a caveat on that. So let me go through a whole bunch of things, right? These things. Now, this is my opinion. People will disagree with me, but it's an opinion that I can back up with real world results consistently. So I want to say that. I've backed this up with getting results. It's verified. I can show you the evidence. So, what are all these things? They're trying to set up resonances. You get in the robes, you get the incense, all these things set up resonance. Now, I love incense, so I will almost always use incense in these sorts of rituals. Even the circle. What is a circle doing? You're calling up resonances that protect you. But where is the contact with these spirits actually happening? It's still happening in your mind. If you have a mirror and you're seeing a spirit, where is that contact happening? It's a sleight of mind to cause there to be a separation between you and the spirit you're trying to summon. And all of these ritual components, you've spent energy and time, and they are not just anchors, but they all are also imbued with your energy. So if you make your own robe, if you make your own sword, which you're supposed to, your own dagger, but hardly anyone does that because that's the skill set we don't really have in the modern world. Takes an enormous amount of work, and while you're working with these tools, you are imbuing them with intention. They are you. They're components and extensions of your essence. They become part of you, and they become focus points that project a certain resonance. So you have the circle, you have either the wand or you have the knife. These, you know what they mean. They're imbued with your energy, that you can focus through your energy and mind through them. And what ritual magic is setting up is a system of metaphors to take you and direct your energy in a certain way to bring that spirit forward. Now, in Hands-on Chaos Magic, I gave an evocation with Spock, which I took a lot of flack for from lots of people on the ceremonial magic train. But the truth is, the techniques are all there, right? You're just creating a circle of protection, a triangle, a focus point. The circle protection even is a metaphor that you're applying to keep the entity from gaining too much access to your mind. Because it gains too much access to your mind, and there's not that idea of separation, it can then change the principles and properties of your subconscious mind without your knowledge, and use your energy against you to do bad things. Now, ultimately, these things are sleights of mind. You could do it by the book, but I guarantee you I've done it just with the seal and making sure that I was mentally clear and centered and can pull a spirit in front of me with witnesses feeling their presence. Why? Because if you know about the spirit, you don't need the sleight of mind. But you do need the sleight of mind when you're training. Because you get used to the projecting the energy, you get used to projecting the intention. Pure classicists will say you can't do it that way, and it will never work. But results don't bear it out. We've tried to do it both ways, with and without things, and you can do it without it. Now, some things are more helpful, and that's key. It's sometimes more helpful to have the dagger, the robes, the circle, because it adds layers of amplification if you know what those symbols mean, and it adds layers of theatrics and beauty and aesthetics to the ritual, which add to the overall ambience of the ritual itself, which further lets your mind sink into the ritual. It's kind of like the difference between telling mm, an okay story and a fantastic story. If your mind is telling a fantastic story through this great ambient ritual, it's going to be able to connect much better. You're going to lose yourself in that fantastic story. And that fantastic story is the ritual. And when everyone's in the zone of that fantastic story, it becomes awesome in a collective group experience that can lift everyone up or make everyone shocked and humbled because there's social proof mechanisms that also reinforce that shared experience and make it more powerful. You can only do that by having the ritual story be that aesthetically pleasing and all encompassing. That's why 5-hour rituals are still useful. That's why it's useful to learn how to do it by the book, because you can make it so that these people who might not be at the level to do that themselves can have much more powerful experiences because they'll buy into it.
And I appreciate how, with your thought process, as far as performing some type of ritual, as long as you prepare mentally, you don't need the extra tools physically, but if you want to amplify them for a certain reason, you can with them. So, that's a very articulate way to put it, and I certainly appreciate that. Now, another thing also, as far as the soul or the essence of spirit, what is your opinion on the soul, and where do you think we go after this physical existence?
Well, that's a tough question too. I mean, I think first, I don't think after this physical existence that time is the same, which means it might be very difficult to put it into words or any kind of thought processes that we have now. Because once you're outside of time, it gets very difficult to conceptualize things in time. So time becomes another big caveat. The second thing is you don't have sensory information. So I suspect that you if you have developed enough skills that you have a choice. You could keep your personality together. You might wander the earth as that personality. That's like ghosts type thing or spirits, you know. Or you might decide to go back into the wheel of reincarnation. Most people, I think, what actually happens is they dissolve back into all that is, the void, the chaos, whatever you want to call it, because they haven't developed enough strength of essence to survive the death process. Now, this is just purely conjecture because I haven't died.
That's an interesting way to put it. If you're spiritually evolved enough, you might have an opportunity to decide.
And even then, you might decide to go back and dissolve, just
Sure.
because your perspective after death would be radically different than in life. It just might be something that makes sense. Or you might want to keep going. It depends. So it's hard to say, but I think you have a choice of where it goes. If you have enough force to survive, if you have enough force to have thought past death, which, like I said, I don't necessarily think everyone will. I think it has to be earned.
Right. That's
Like you can't just assume that if you've lived your life on autopilot through your whole life that you're just not going to dissolve back into all it is, because you're not making willful choices through life, and everything is kind of distracting you from making those kind of choices. So in death, the most natural thing would be to dissolve back in. Like, what if we, Austin Spear, because this conflicts with a lot of ritual magic and idea. Austin Spear and Peter Carroll, and when you get into the chaos current, they called it the Kia, and it was formless. And the way they described it was just a spark. That's all we get. It's just a spark. It's not this fully formed thing that is a soul, but it could be, depending on what you do in life. And that's something that Gerthoff touches on in his materials too. Most people are asleep. You have to earn the soul. And it makes sense if you think about it. Why do people get stronger in magic? Is probably because they are able to more interface with that spark and imprint it. And that's by imprinting it, in essence, to project that out into reality. It may not be the case that you just get that for free. You might actually have to spend a lifetime practicing this kind of stuff.
That's an interesting point, and it brings me to my next question. I was watching a clip on YouTube the other day, which was a previous recording of Roseanne Barr, and she was on a late night talk show, and she had on red gloves, and she was bragging about how when she was 12 years old, she wanted fame so bad that she asked the devil himself to give her fame. And she said in the interview, "I'll do anything you want, just give me fame." And she says that she sold her soul. And then she says that she forgot about the contract that she signed, and she started to lose fame. So she asked for a remortgage, a new mortgage, basically, refinance. And then she was given it. And there's so many people in Hollywood and acting and singers that literally brag about how they sold their soul to the devil. Do you think there's something to that? I mean, do people actually, because I've read about how you can supposedly sell your soul to the devil. And whether I believe in the devil or not, it certainly seems like these guys do. And they certainly have a lot of money and fame and fortune, at least in the materialistic side of things.
Sure. You can sell your soul to the devil, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
I mean, from my point of view, what is the devil? It gets into much more complicated details, right? Especially given the light of a conversation. They believe that they sold their soul to the devil and they won't be saved by Jesus and God. But maybe that was just enough of an act of rebellion to break the conditioning. So they would go after what they actually wanted. Because that's a radical thing, right? There's no salvation then for them. There's no sticking with the moral compass at that point. And if you actually look at the same people who say they sold their soul, I'm sure some of them are fantastic people, but once they did that, they probably no longer had the limiters on what they were willing to do to get that fame.
Right.
You can use the metaphor of the devil if you need a scapegoat to do that.
Right.
I mean, really.
Right.
And that's a powerful technique. That's what the Church of Satan was all about. Now, everyone thinks the Church of Satan is this evil organization, but most of the people I know in the Church of Satan are pretty honorable. They're strict materialists. They don't believe in spiritual stuff at all.
Right. They're humanists more than.
They're humanists who like gothic clothing. And they'll admit to that. They value rational thought and scientific thought over any spirituality. So why do they do these rituals? Because they know that to really open yourself up, you have to transgress and break some of these cultural norms that prevent you from actually going after what you want. That's the whole point of the Church of Satan. So of course, if you believe that you're damned, it's going to have a powerful impact on your whole psyche. You're gonna actually live every life as if that's it for you, and even that in itself is powerful. It's more nuanced than just selling your soul to Satan. Obviously, you know, clearly, I would be one who mostly have had experiences with spirits, so I know they exist. I'm not about to sell my spark to anything or serve anything on that side of things. That's just how I roll. You know, I'd rather do it the hard way to make a diamond out of my life, to use the techniques that I'm talking about to understand what's going on and really deal with and better myself. So, sure. Now, I'm not saying that everyone should go out and make a deal with the devil. That's not what I'm saying. But understand where those people are coming from if you think about it and really understand the politics and what happens to a person who believes that they've done that. They will not be limited in the way that most of us are. They won't be free to actually pursue what they actually desire without the moral limitations. And this goes into the, you know, what is, what happens when you turn away from a religion? You can't easily do it. But if you go and sell your soul to the devil, you've turned away from the religion. And then all sorts of odd things can happen in your life.
And another interesting thing, even with Aleister Crowley, he called himself the wickedest man in the world. I don't know if he did that for publicity reasons or if he
That's
really
a
felt
certainly
that
hard
way.
question
But
with Mr. Crowley.
yeah, and even Ozzy Osbourne, that song, Mr. Crowley. But regardless, he even says that you shouldn't sell your soul to the devil, and then he describes how to do it. He's like,
Isn't
don't
that
do it, but if
isn't
you
that
want to,
like so much of his work?
it's
Here,
interesting.
don't do this, and here's how to do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's like just a total, mind trick. Maybe he knew something about reverse psychology and he thought it would get more people to read. But regardless, Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, did he even believe in the devil, or was he just?
No,
Yeah.
no, he didn't. He didn't believe in any of it. He was a carny, a carnival man, a con man.
And so many people, prestigious individuals, or at least that they consider themselves prestigious, people in Hollywood, in other aspects of the media that were, high in power or, had a lot of influence, they flocked to him and basically worshipped him. And then people like, are you familiar with Michael Aquino
Yeah, yeah.
and the Church of Set? What is your take on the Church of Set? I know that their bio basically is they believe in this ancient Egyptian deity because of a specific difference that it had versus the other Egyptian gods.
Well, now full disclosure. At one time, I was a member of the Temple of Set. So, yeah, you know, again, the difference there between the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set is pretty simple. You know, the Temple of Set actually believes that there's this aspect of out there in some externalized way that allows for humans to evolve. They would name that Set, but that's not the only name it is. And that aspect, that desire to grab onto what they call the black flame, is how we actually evolve through opposition, and that it's a force, an actual force. The Church of Satan it's all just a joke. In setting in thought, it is not a joke. You believe this outside force exists, and it isn't necessarily one force. It isn't as simple as what people would think of as here's a spirit and you just bow down and worship to it. It's not so much worship as it is working with this force and tapping into it, which is very different.
Why did you get out of the Church of Set?
Um, in a lot of ways, it just didn't sit with me. Uh, Most of it was I didn't interface with the people well. It's not so much that I didn't think that it was worthwhile, and it often comes down to that in magical groups. Is you just don't jive with the people, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, just like with your job, if you have a job, you don't deal well with the people you work with just because you're not syncing with them, it can make it a lot more difficult. I totally understand that.
Yeah, and you just kind of move on um, because it just isn't working for you. And a lot of these philosophies, like there's a lot to be said. You know, if you read like Don Webb's books, who's from the Temple of Set, there's a lot of wisdom if you read them and how you're interacting with the world, right? To find a spiritual center inside yourself that they would call the black flame, to be able to move through the world and ignore opposition, or to use that opposition to propel yourself forward. You know, that's not to get broken by the opposition, not to get pushed back by the opposition. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
That isn't, you know, when you get past all the spooky and dark things, that's what their philosophy is about, is intellectual rigor combined with finding that part of yourself that will not be controlled, that will not be cajoled, that will not be otherwise dominated, so that you can learn how to move through the world in the most powerful way you can. And that's a quite different philosophy than what I think most people think is going on with the Temple of Set. It's very, very, very different in from what the public eye is on this versus what actually goes on.
Well, you've got the internet, which, you know, people can say anything about anyone at any time, and you can be a car salesman, and somebody might say on the internet that you are a reptilian shapeshifter that works for the CIA and has you know, magical laser beams that can come out of your eyes if you're not wearing Ray-Ban sunglasses. So, you know, it's good to get information from actual people that have been a part of those organizations or the Church of Set versus just talking to somebody that read something on a forum that said something about somebody else that was brothers, sisters, nephews, uncle, you know, and that's good. But we, you know, and we don't have a whole lot of time here left on the Leak project, so I was hoping for the last subject that we could discuss is Luciferianism. Most people, if you say that word, will cringe and you know, get pretty freaked out. I had an opportunity to read a book by Michael Ford once. I have you know, studied all sorts of different topics on magic just to get information, and it was a very interesting book indeed. What is your take on Luciferianism and the overall agenda or persona behind it?
Well, Luciferianism often, and I know Michael Ford, you know, Luciferian has very similar mindsets to the Temple Set. It's not exactly the same. But the idea is this idea of becoming more powerful in the world through the use of magic. And this rigorous self analysis to understand what opposition is, and in opposition in your life, and how you should approach it. So it's very similar to the Temple Set in some ways. Not exactly the same. They have different, obvious different. Different specifics, but the difference here is you're working on yourself, and by working on yourself, you're this greater picture of what happens in the world isn't important. Um, and in some ways, that's more honest. In some ways, you can get into situations where, well, you can work on yourself and be a corporate CEO, but in the long term, a lot of those people are acting in short-sighted ways. So the focus is on the self, your personal power, and using different magics and spirits to overcome obstacles at every stage, and to really. Now, of course, other people will disagree, right, on what Luciferianism is. And Lucifer is a difficult concept, too, because in Christian mythology, Lucifer is the devil, and that's basically a mistranslation, of the morning star, which is Venus, you know, the first star in the morning. So it gets all kinds of confused. And what is the light? Luciferianism work with the concept of the light bringer. What's the light bringer? What's illumination? It's, again, thought to the masses, the personal power, being able to overcome those obstacles and move yourself forward. This is it is in a way opposite to the Judeo-Christian religions, but not in the way people think. It's not so easily. Here's the devil, and it's this oppositional force that just wants to do bad stuff. Well, not so much, because the oppositional thought to just blind obedience is actually to think and to cultivate higher order of thinking as much as possible. And that's profoundly powerful. And when you think about it, that is really the opposite of religions that tell you not to think at all. That really is the opposite of the slave culture. It's the opposite of all the things where people have blind obedience, that we often fall into. And that's a scary place to be. And it takes a while to exist in a state that's okay. It doesn't come naturally. We want to, get along. We want to all be together. And to step out of that takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of courage, takes time, which is why these philosophies you follow over a whole lifetime, not just one ritual.
Also, Baphomet, the horned god, there's many descriptions and thoughts as to what or who Baphomet actually is. If you read into Mr. Levi's work from back in the day, he describes Baphomet as actually just being an initiatory process into the higher self, as above, so below. The horns representing the earthly desires, the wings representing the heavenly desires, and then it has the infinite symbol, etc. But what is your take on Baphomet? Who is Baphomet, and what is Baphomet?
Well, I definitely have done a lot of work with Baphomet, and I don't necessarily think of it simply as the devil or anything like that. I usually take the approach that Baphomet is a personification of the sum total of all life on planet Earth. The Baphomet current then is potentially a powerful current that dissolves opposites, because life contains all of the opposites. So it's powerful. It is definitely will change a person tremendously. Because even working with such a concept of opposites takes you from one opposite through the other and forces you to see almost all opposites as the same thing. And when you get to that kind of mindset, it becomes much easier to, well, to shapeshift, to go flexible through the world. Baphomet is originally probably, there's no agreement, a cipher for Sophia or wisdom, and that makes sense. Wisdom without words, the sum total of life on earth, wisdom without words, direct Gnostic experiences of wisdom, things that one encounter can take years to process, to work through, to see how you've changed, um, to gain insights that come from nonverbal insights, in understanding the world and understanding the illusion of opposites around us. Um, it's not us versus them. It's not good versus evil. It's not man versus woman. It's not devil versus angel. And if you look at Levi's Baphomet, particularly, all of those elements are in Levi's Baphomet of angel, demon, pan, earth, heaven, Kundalini fire, you know, all of these opposites are there at the same time. And if you can work with Baphomet, those illusions of the opposites of our world go away. And you realize you can be anything. You can do anything. You can change yourself however you need to. You can understand that those opposites can't exist in any kind of isolation from themselves. They exist in a context that each opposite defines each other, right? Kind of breaks down so many of the illusions that you accept and that many of us accept in our society. And it doesn't matter what society you're in, because the force dissolves it. It just makes it dissolve and recreate. Literally, solve et Caligula, dissolve and recreate. And the choice there is then, after you dissolve those opposites, what would you recreate? And that's probably the secret of the magical child in a lot of ways, and a lot of secrets of ceremonial magic and magic in general.
Fascinating. And, I just wanted to ask you this one last question. I forgot to bring this up earlier, and I know you talk a little bit about it in your book. Sex magic and different type of sexual fluids that are able to be more powerful in a magical spell, let's say. Why is that? I mean, why is it that sex magic is so powerful, and those those fluids are so powerful in order to obtain a certain goal with magic?
Well, it depends on how you're doing sex magic. That probably matters a lot as to its power. But your sexual fluids are directly connected to you. They're direct sympathetic links, and usually, for most people, the sex act is in fact very powerful. So it's you have a double emotion. You have a soup of emotions, of physical release, of an energy surge, and a sympathetic link back to yourself. That all add to the power of that. Plus, that sex magic is about creation. Its secret is about creation. It is ultimately about creating. Its purpose is procreating. So if you divert the purpose and energy of a sexual act, which normally would pull a spirit, if you believe that humans have spirits, or pull a spark from the ether into a body, and then a child is born, that's a very powerful process that you can then redirect towards your will. So it's tapping into all of these different elements at the same time, and it's one of the primordial aspects of all humans that go back well before even the mammal. time. So you're redirecting this biological power towards basically a golem or a magical child or whatever goal you have. And because of all those components, it can be very powerful. But that said, if the sex isn't good, the result of magic's probably not going to be good. No, it's true, because it's not just an energy thing, but you haven't got to the right state of mind. Right? Everyone, you can masturbate all day long, and sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's not. You're not in getting to the right place, the right boom. It's not going to work, and that's the same with a partner. If it's there and it's kind of laissez-faire, magic's not going to work unless it's rip-roaring sex, which is why you work on it. That's why you do tantra stuff and all kinds of other exercises if you're going to do sex magic, to build up how much pleasure and power comes from the act. So again, it's not as simple as just you do the sex magic act and it's instant results. You still have to be able to you still have to get to that place of rip-roaring sex. So if you're with somebody and you're trying to do sex magic and it's like ho-hum with that person, that's not the person you should be doing sex magic with. And I know that seems obvious, but I bet people have tried and it's not. And then it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. And
so, so go ahead.
I was just going to say, Andrieh, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show with us here at the Leak Project. Really appreciate you spending a couple hours with us. Gave us some fantastic information, definitely food for thought, a lot of details and intel on subjects that most people have no idea about or have been misinformed many times. I think it's really good to get a fresh approach on what you're talking about and help people understand certain things that might be important to them. So if you would, please give our listeners your website and contact information if they want to get a hold of you for possible work, on spiritual coaching or just information to your books and knowledge, please.
Sure. My website is AndriehVitimus.com, and that's AndriehVitimus.com. And yeah, I do spiritual coaching, but I also do business coaching. Again, I'm getting an MBA and life coaching. I kind of combine all those together. I usually post my events up on the webpage, and the next event that I'll be doing is I'll be rerunning my Shapeshifting 365 course in February. So it's a little while, but it'll be well worth it. People are having tremendous life changes from that course right now.
A very special thank you to our guest tonight. For all of you that had the opportunity to be here with us, if you enjoyed the show, follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/clandestine timelord, for the most recent interviews, videos, and podcasts. Or you can check us out on the World Wide Web, www.leakproject.com. Would you like to be a guest on our show? Do you have information that the world needs to see and hear? Send us an email. guestbookings@leakproject.com. Thank you, everybody. This is Rex Bear with Leak Project. Stay safe and be the change you want to see. Good night.